And the judge in Sean Diddy Combs' sex trafficking trial is expected to decide this morning whether to throw out a portion of last week's testimony. It concerns a witness who was called after Combs' ex-girlfriend, Cassies finished testifying on Friday. CBS News legal contributor Caroline Polisi joins us now here in Studio 57 in New York with more on this. Caroline, good to see you. So explain what testimony may be thrown out and why.
Yeah, Chanel, it's looking more and more like that testimony will not be thrown out. Obviously, last week was all about the star witness, Cassies Ventura, star victim, I should say. She's victim number one in that government indictment. But the testimony from Dawn Richard was meant to corroborate some of Cassies' abuse. And part of that corroboration was an incident that she testified about when Diddy actually, she alleged, hit Cassie with a skillet. She was making eggs. He got, enraged and hit her with a skillet. Now, she also testified that thereafter, Diddy told her that people who spoke about these types of things tend to disappear and that she took that as a threat on her life. The defense attorneys, rightfully so, objected to a lot of this testimony, saying much of it was hearsay. In trials, there are very strict rules of evidence. The judge is concerned that a lot of these now corroborating witnesses may be veering into hearsay gossip. You only want witnesses to testify, and they're only allowed to testify to things that they directly saw or heard. So that's part of this objection, as well as this statement that Diddy apparently made to her. We're already seeing the defense today really try to get into those inconsistencies in Richard's testimony about whether did she actually witness this abuse or did she just see perhaps the aftermath of it. So that's kind of the issue here. The issue is the scope of the testimony. It does seem that the judge is going to allow that testimony to stand on Friday, but going into more of this testimony today, there may be a sort of a tighter scope around what they can testify to.
Yeah, and I wonder, because you mentioned this, Cassie finishing her days-long stretch of emotional testimony last week, and how will her testimony then impact how the case moves forward?
Yeah, she was a very credible witness, I do have to say, obviously testified to years of abuse. The defense is already acknowledging that this was a domestic violence relationship. The question is, can the prosecution prove that this was sex trafficking, that this was a RICO conspiracy? So you'll see witnesses this week like Cassie's mother, her best friend of over 17 years, corroborating this information about the abuse. Now, the defense is saying, all right, there were instances of abuse, but how is that relevant necessarily to force, fraud, or coercion relating to sex trafficking? So that's kind of what the argument is here. The defense is saying these are just bad acts witnesses. We call them bad acts witnesses because traditionally that type of testimony is not allowed in trials when that specific conduct isn't being charged. He's not being charged with domestic violence or assault in this case. So that will be an issue coming up. But I think it's all about corroboration this week.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to make. And Caroline, also want to ask just about next steps. Are there any other key witnesses that you'll be expecting to hear from?
Yeah, certainly. Remember, there are other victims in this case. There are other co-conspirators in this case that haven't been charged. So we're expected to hear from personal assistants and chefs, things like that, to Diddy, and whether or not they are sort of victims as well as co-conspirators. That'll be maybe a fine line to draw, but certainly with information about drug use. Remember, we heard about that potential arson, obstruction of justice. Remember, those are more of the elements involved in this racketeering conspiracy that the government really hasn't gotten on the table yet, and I would expect we would hear this week.
All right, Caroline Polisi, thank you.
Thank you.